University of Chicago Public Policy Podcast.
Under orders from the Secretary of Defense, women can now try out for all combat jobs in all services.
We turn now to what some military officials call an enduring and pressing emergency, the rise in veteran suicides.
But more than a dozen current and former cadets have told CBS News they reported their sexual assaults to the Air Force Academy, only to then experience retaliation.
Don't ask, don't tell is history, but there's still plenty to talk about.
Hello and welcome back to Thank You for Your Service, a hard look at American civil military affairs from the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts. I'm Nick Pareso.
And I'm Thomas Krasnation.
A few episodes ago, we talked about reasons for joining the military, the stereotypes, and the realities. Today we'll be looking at who makes up the military. What are the demographics of our armed forces? What kinds of people join? And what kinds of recruiting efforts has the military put into practice?
To help answer these questions, we spoke to Dave Phillips, a national correspondent with the New York Times based out of Colorado Springs. Dave covers the military and veterans, usually from a ground-level perspective, reporting among bases and troops around the country. He joined the Times in 2014, and he has won a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting.
Dave Phillips, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, no problem.
So, Dave, could you tell our listeners just a quick bio about yourself, how you came to the Times, and what you cover for them?
So I started working for the New York Times in 2014 as a military correspondent. And what that's meant over the years is we have some folks who work in the Pentagon. We have some folks in Washington who specialize in talking to spooky people who we never quote by name. But then we also have me, who is, I write about the Joes. I write about the people that actually make up the military, their lives, sort of the on the ground stuff. And the reason I do that is I started my reporting career in Colorado Springs, Colorado, which has a big military base, Army base, Fort Carson, but then also a number of Air Force bases. And I had just always been surrounded by people, my neighbors, the people I met at the grocery store, people I would run into at barbecues, who were active duty or recently so. And that really shaped my approach to writing about the military. It wasn't, I feel like there's a, generally in the media, military reporters write about the military in the same way sports reporters write about sports. They talk about strategy, they talk about who's winning and losing, and they talk to the coaches, i.e. the generals, but they rarely drill down to the actual people who are on the field. And so that's what I wanted to do with what I do. Just talk to the normal people.
Awesome. So the reason we reached out to you is because you wrote this article earlier this year with your colleague Tim Arango about the shifting demographics of military recruitment. What is it that led you and Tim to write this piece?
This was actually an assignment. That doesn't happen too often. Most of the time we're bringing ideas to the mothership, but this time the mothership brought an idea to us. And they said, hey, with all this escalating tension with Iran, with the fact that we've been at war now for almost 20 years, we really have no idea who joins the military these days. Can you write about that? So that's what we did. Very broad. We just wanted to give a snapshot of who's there. And I think going into it, we didn't know what that answer would be. Obviously, if you look at the demographics, the military is mostly men. But what are the other differences that might be surprising? We didn't know.
And of course, the demographics we see now in the military are very different from what we saw many, many years ago. In 1973, after the Vietnam War, policymakers decided to end the draft and turn the U.S. military into an all-volunteer force. And that policy change would have huge effects on recruitment, on who we see joining the military. Can you describe to us what the U.S. military looked like before 1973, during the Vietnam War, compared to what it looks like now?
When the draft was ended during Vietnam, there was a great deal of hand-wringing amongst policymakers that might cause things to become unequal as time went on and trends started to emerge. And those hand-wringers lost the argument because the draft was already really, really unequal. If you look at the example that most people are familiar with is President Trump he got something like 4 deferments. One of them because he got his doctor to write a letter saying that he had bad feet and couldn't go into the military. But that trend was happening all across upper class and upper middle class America, where if you were in college or you had some connections, you didn't have to serve. You could either get out of it entirely or at least get some plum assignment where you were likely to not get killed. Another example is President George W. Bush, who did his compulsory military service as a reservist in Texas. So there were problems with the draft and it being unequal. But the one thing that it did have going for it is geographically, it was pretty darn equal. You had local draft boards. They had a certain number of people they had to send based on their populations, and they would have to send them. Once that ended, what we've started to see continually since then is a real geographic spread starting to happen. Places with higher income, higher education level, mostly in the Northeast and northern parts of the United States, they really started to send fewer and fewer people to enlist in the military. More rural places and places with more military bases, they started to send proportionally more people. And what emerged, you can see this on a map, what emerged is that more and more the rates of participation were shifting to the South. The old states of the Confederacy they totally overrepresent now in terms of the number of people per capita who enlist in the military.
So what you're saying is during the draft, even though it may have been unequal in terms of income representation, it was representative of the geography of the country. Whereas today, that representation on geography has shifted away from the North and it's more congregated in the South now.
Right. And numbers wise, it doesn't mean that there aren't people that enlist in the North and that everyone's from the South. But if you look at the number of young eligible people in all of these states who could join, the Northeast, New England especially, is about 20% underrepresented. The Southeast is about 20% overrepresented.
And so in your article, you have these 2 maps, and obviously we're an audio podcast, so people can't see them right now. But
this is great radio, huh?
Yeah, but we're looking at these 2 maps, one from 1998 and one from 2018. We were wondering if you could describe what this map represents and how it changes between 1998 and 2018, because it's really interesting.
So all of the military branches keep careful track of where enlistments are coming from. Like anyone else, they want to know their market, their demographics. And so basically county by county, they have been tracking for a very long time. What you see in 1998 is a fairly speckled map. There's places of high enlistment and places of low enlistment. But they're kind of scattered all over the country. And what you see 20 years later is that a lot of the dots that mark high participation in the North are gone. And the spots that there's sort of a band of counties through the Southeast. The Army calls this the crooked smile. It's this crescent that stretches basically from Washington, D.C. to maybe Dallas. That just has really, really high participation. And that shows where people are reliably coming from.
And as we see these changing demographics, this crooked smile developing, I think some people point to certain stereotypes about military recruiting as the reasons for those changing patterns. What are some of those stereotypes about recruiting that you've uncovered in your reporting?
Yeah, listen, readers are never shy to tell me when they think I'm an idiot. And I had all sorts of messages saying that part of the country is just more patriotic. I had all sorts of different people postulating. I think some of the more middle of the road assumptions were when you have places with low youth unemployment, when you have places with low youth college participation, those are going to be the places where you're going to have the most luck recruiting, which makes sense, right? If there's a lack of other opportunities, then all of a sudden military service starts to look like a very good option. But what the military has realized through research, they essentially have used AI and machine learning to go through, 200, 2,000, I don't remember how many, but all these different demographic possibilities and say, is it this? Is it that? Is it college? Is it unemployment? And it turns out that common assumption is wrong, or at least it's not very significant. And the big factors that really drive people to join the military is familiarity with the military. And by familiarity, what they mean is this. If you know somebody that you are close to that is serving or has recently served, that more than anything else will steer you towards, being predisposed to serve. So if you have a coach that you respect, a teacher, a pastor, a mother, a father, an uncle who demystifies military service for you, shows you what it's really about, rather than I think the images we get through TV and movies, which is all combat. That makes it way, way, way more likely that you will sign up.
So it's not necessarily about race, not necessarily about income. The number one factor is, are you familiar with a service member who can clear the air on what military service is actually about?
That's part of it. So you said it's not about race, it's not about income. Of course, people are super complex and the military is huge. So there's lots of different reasons. So sometimes it appears it is about race. I'll give you an example. Black women join the military at twice the rate of white women, twice the rate. That's a huge, huge difference. And that may have to do with education and economic opportunity. But in general, if you throw all of the people who are enlisting into one pot, the biggest factor is, do you know somebody? And the way that breaks down geographically, the reason we started seeing these geographic patterns with more people joining in the South is that most of our military installations are below the Mason-Dixon line. We used to have them all over, especially during the Cold War when the military was much, much bigger. But slowly, a lot of those more northern bases have been closed. Why? Because it's cold up there. It limits your training year. And so more of them have shifted south. You not only get active duty who are then living in those communities around those bases, but oftentimes retired military tend to congregate around bases. So you get towns like Fayetteville or San Antonio, Texas, places that have these huge military communities. And so it's very easy there for you to grow up and know all sorts of people who served in the military. Also, those adults, whether active duty or retired, start shaping their communities to encourage young people to join. And I'll tell you what I mean. So in a place like Fayetteville, if you go to high school there, one of the things that you can do is join the junior ROTC. And that means that you'll learn all these different things about health, science, physical fitness, leadership through this program, and oftentimes even get class credit for it. And you wear a uniform to school once a week. And it really sort of normalizes that idea of like, hey, this is cool and legit career field. And also when it gets time for you to get out of high school, all high schools across the country take standardized tests, whether it's the SAT or the ACT to prepare for college. Well, a lot of these military communities also take the military's aptitude tests. And what that does is it gives you, the individual student, a score. And then, hey, you can look up all the career fields in the military that you qualify for that in that score. So all of a sudden, here's this list of jobs the military will give you, many of them not combat related at all. You could be a nurse, you could be a pilot, you could be a computer tech, you could be a mechanic. These things that really might appeal to people are there sitting right in front of them. So those opportunities are just spelled out for them, and it becomes very easy to choose that route. Let me give you an example of how it works in other parts of the country. There are, especially big cities, I'm sure all of us